ranking all of Disney's live-action remakes. Since 2010, Disney has released dozens of live-action remakes of varying quality. Some have been bold reimaginings that stand on their own 2 feet, others have been shot-for-shot replicas that exist for no other reason than to sell merchandise, and a few have been so bad that Disney didn't even bother releasing them in theaters. With the live-action Moana movie coming out, it felt like the right time to go back and rank all of the Disney remakes that came before it, from the good to the bad to the forgettable. Let's get into it. Alice in Wonderland. The movie that jump-started the current wave of Disney live actions, it's less of a remake of the 1951 film and more of a reimagining/continuation of Lewis Carroll's original stories. Alice Kingsley is a strange 19-year-old who finds herself struggling to fit into Victorian high society. With her family falling on hard times after her father's death, it's expected that she marry the incredibly wealthy, but incredibly boring, Hamish Ascot. But during his proposal, she runs off. She spots a white rabbit wearing a waistcoat and decides to follow it, falling into a hole that brings her to Underland, a strange world with talking animals and a tyrannical ruler. After befriending the residents of Underland and nearly being killed by the Red Queen, Alice embraces her muchness and defeats the evil Jabberwocky. Afterwards, she returns home, declining Hamish's proposal and setting off on her own adventure. I wasn't a huge fan of the remake when it first came out, mainly because of the CGI, with Underland being a bit too uncanny valley for my tastes. Although to be fair, the original has crazy visuals as well. Turning Alice into a quirky badass was also a bit much for me to wrap my head around, with her characterization really feeling like a product of the 2010s girl boss era. Don't get me wrong, having her challenge Victorian norms did fit in with her overall character arc in the film, but becoming a ship apprentice kinda came out of left field, and I would have been perfectly happy with the film ending with her turning down Hamish. But with all of that said, after revisiting the film for the first time in over a decade, it's grown on me, having a great balance of humor, action, tension, and heart. Tim Burton clearly had a specific vision for this adaptation, and his signature psychedelic gothic style worked perfectly for the more mature direction of the story. The biggest plus for me are the new character designs, which are similar to their animated counterparts, but without being exact recreations, and making the Red Queen's head bulbous is such a good gag. You can just tell that Disney wasn't as overly involved in the creative process as they are now, so Burton was actually able to play around with the IP in an interesting way. The cast is honestly one of the film's standouts, with Mia Wasikowska being a fantastic choice for Alice, and I find her version of the character much more enjoyable to watch than the original, who I always found whiny and selfish, although she is a child lost in a strange world, so I'll cut her some slack. Reinterpreting the first film as Alice misremembering Underland is a really clever choice, and I like how they revisited the moments we know and love, but in a new way. It's definitely scarier than the original, but I think that's a good thing, and the change in its tone allows it to work both as its own thing and as a companion piece to the original film, which you can't say about most of Disney's live-action remakes. The Sorcerer's Apprentice. This barely qualifies as a remake since the only similarity to its animated counterpart is its name, but if Disney counts it, I guess I will too. Loosely based on an animated segment of Fantasia, as well as the well-known Arthurian legend, Merlin has been battling the evil Morgana Le Fay with the help of his apprentices Balthazar, Veronica, and Horvath. Horvath betrays them, and Balthazar is tasked with capturing Morgana's remaining loyalists and finding Merlin's successor. Centuries pass, and 10-year-old Dave bumps into Balthazar, putting on a magic ring and revealing himself as the prime Merlinian. But he accidentally frees Horvath while fooling around with his powers. Balthazar traps himself and Horvath away for another decade, and when they're released, they seek out Dave, who's reluctant to accept his destiny. Eventually, he agrees to be Balthazar's apprentice, but his training is often interrupted by his flirtations with his childhood crush, Becky. Horvath kidnaps Becky and forces Dave into giving him his ring, and without the ability to perform magic, Dave uses his tech knowledge as a weapon instead. Horvath releases Morgana, and the two sides battle it out. Finally confident in himself, Dave is able to unlock his powers, destroy Morgana, and revive Balthazar, eventually riding off into the sunset with Becky in victory. You can definitely tell that The Sorcerer's Apprentice was a product of its time, being a little too similar to other Chosen One narratives like the Spiderwick Chronicles, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and The Seeker. which is funny because that made it unoriginal in the broader cultural sense, even though it's a completely different story from its animated counterpart. I honestly think that the premise had potential, but they didn't do anything interesting with it. Instead, they rely on tired cliches and spend all of their time talking down to the audience and exposition dumping every 10 minutes or so, which makes the film feel kinda cheap. As if that wasn't bad enough, I also find Dave a really unlikable protagonist. He's irresponsible, he's constantly complaining, and he's overly sarcastic. That sort of character type worked for Jay Baruchel in How to Train Your Dragon, but in The Sorcerer's Apprentice, it makes him tough to root for. And that unlikability is kind of the problem with all of the characters. I mean, Becky is a nonsensical male fantasy, while Balthazar is the same type of grumpy hero we've seen Nicolas Cage play a dozen times. Honestly, the only thing the movie has going for it is Monica Bellucci as a hot sorceress and some mildly amusing action moments. Maleficent. A retelling of the 1959 film, Maleficent follows a powerful fairy who lives in and protects the magical moors. As a child, she meets and falls in love with a human boy named Stefan, but his ambition for wealth and power eventually leads to him betraying her. Broken-hearted, Maleficent seeks revenge, cursing Stefan's newborn daughter Aurora with endless sleep, which can only be broken by true love. Stefan hides Aurora in the woods under the care of 3 pixies, but they're so useless that Maleficent ends up helping raise the girl from a distance. As the years pass, they grow closer, and Maleficent eventually regrets the curse, only to discover that even she can't undo it. The curse is fulfilled, but Maleficent's maternal love for her is able to break the spell. After Stefan falls to his death, Maleficent crowns Aurora ruler of the Moors, finally uniting the 2 kingdoms. Like Alice in Wonderland, this is less of a remake of the animated film and more of a reimagining of the source fairy tale, just with some familiar visuals and story beats. The characters are the biggest change by far. Philip is basically irrelevant, Stefan is despicable, and the fairies, imbeciles. Honestly, the only characters you care about are Maleficent and Aurora, which works because their relationship drives the entire story. And while you can see what's coming a mile away, you're still invested. Bad guy origin stories have become kind of a joke trope at this point, but because Maleficent isn't reframed as an outright hero and is instead morally gray, it doesn't feel like a complete betrayal of her character. Sure, she's vengeful and cruel, but in a way you can actually empathize with. The scene where she wakes up and realizes her wings are gone is one of the most harrowing moments in any Disney film, period. A pretty clear allegory for sexual assault, I applaud them for addressing such a serious issue in a way that is understandable and approachable for people of all ages. There's a lot of CGI, but nowhere near as distracting as Alice in Wonderland, and the creature designs in the Moors are so inventive that it's almost a shame they only exist in the Maleficent universe. And casting-wise, I'm not sure Disney has ever topped this one. Angelina Jolie and Elle Fanning are so perfectly matched to their roles that it's hard to imagine anyone else playing Maleficent and Aurora, which is probably why they brought them both back for the sequel. Cinderella. A combination of the 1950 cartoon and 1998's Ever After, the Cinderella remake follows the story beats of the original pretty faithfully. Ella is a kind-hearted young woman who's left in the care of her wicked stepmother and spiteful stepsisters after her father's sudden passing. Treated as a servant in her own home, she develops an unexpected connection with a charming stranger in the woods, who unbeknownst to her is the prince of the kingdom. After being forbidden from attending the royal ball, Ella's fairy godmother appears and makes all of her wishes come true. What follows is the most famous meet-cute in Disney history, but Ella and the prince's romance is cut short at midnight. While fleeing the castle, Ella leaves behind her glass slipper, which the prince uses to track her down and rescue her from her dire circumstances. The production design alone makes Cinderella worth watching, being one of the most visually spectacular Disney remakes by far. There's just enough CGI to make things feel magical, but it isn't used as a crutch. Kenneth Branagh did a great job of building out this faux historical fantasy world that blends different time periods into something that feels timeless. The sets are gorgeous, the actors actually interact with their surroundings, and the costumes are just stunning. Sandy Powell actually did such a good job with the wardrobe that she even made me okay with Cinderella's ball gown not being silver, even if they did crank up the saturation in post. The decision to move away from the talking animals and musical numbers of the original is also a really smart decision. Making the animals more realistic keeps you grounded in Ella's world, which means when the fairy godmother finally shows up, it feels all the more magical and special. The original songs are iconic, but I just know if they tried to put them in a modern movie, there'd inevitably be a terrible update, which would have been a huge mistake. What separates the film from a lot of Disney's other live-action efforts is how much care went into the characters. Lily James is perfectly charming, and this version of Cinderella's kindness never reads as naivete or weakness. She's just someone trying to honor her mother's memory, which makes every moment of mistreatment genuinely upsetting to watch. Richard Madden looks the part of the prince, and expanding on his character's motivations and having him meet Ella before the ball was a really smart move. The scene where the two dance and walk around the castle is honestly so romantic that you completely understand why he goes to such lengths to find her again. Cate Blanchett as Lady Tremaine is another highlight. She's given just enough backstory to make her a real human character, but without ever excusing her behavior. She's cruel, but not cartoonishly so, which is a harder balance to strike than it sounds. Overall, it's one of the few Disney remakes that I actually find myself rewatching. The Jungle Book. Mowgli has been raised by wolves in the jungles of India, but after the tiger Shere Khan learns of his presence, he vows to kill him. For the safety of the wolf pack, Mowgli sets off for the man village with his mentor, the panther Bagheera. He encounters a carefree bear, Baloo, a hypnotic python, Kaa, and the scheming orangutan, King Louie, along the way. After Shere Khan kills Mowgli's adoptive wolf father, Mowgli stops running and uses his human resourcefulness to fight back, ultimately defeating the tiger with fire. Unlike the animated film, rather than leaving for the man village at the end, Mowgli chooses to stay in the jungle with his animal family. This version of Mowgli is a lot easier to root for than the original, who spent most of the movie being a snotty brat who got everyone else around him into trouble. The live-action Mowgli still has his moments. He's a kid after all, but at least here you understand why everyone's going to such lengths to protect him. Where the original Shere Khan played with Mowgli like a cat toying with his lunch, the live-action version is outright terrifying. He's manipulative and completely merciless, a true Disney villain. You all know how I feel about celebrity voice casting, but they actually did a decent job here of matching actors to characters rather than just stacking the cast with big names. I don't love the choice to keep it a full musical, but I am glad that they kept King Louie's number because Christopher Walken absolutely kills it. That said, the film has its fair share of issues. Because almost everything is computer animated, Neil Setti sticks out like a sore thumb, with his interactions with the other characters feeling flat and awkward. Now, I don't pin all of the blame on him. Plenty of far more experienced actors have complained about being the only human on an empty soundstage, but it's the type of thing that could have been somewhat resolved by having actual people for him to play off of. The animals suffer from the same problem I have with most of Disney's photorealistic visual effects. They're impressive, but they're not expressive. And if you muted a scene, you genuinely wouldn't be able to tell if a character is happy, angry, or terrified from their face alone. The film made nearly $1 billion and a sequel was immediately greenlit, but it's been on indefinite pause ever since, which honestly is fine by me. It's not bad by Disney's recent standards, but stacked up against other Jungle Book adaptations like the 1994 live action or even 2018's Mowgli, it isn't my favorite. Beauty and the Beast. Belle is a bookish young woman living in a provincial French town, but after her father stumbles into the enchanted castle of a cursed prince, she must trade her own freedom for his. She and the Beast initially butt heads, but slowly warm to each other. Before they can declare their love, the castle is attacked by the townspeople, led by Gaston, who wants to marry Belle himself. The Beast is injured while protecting Belle, but their love for each other breaks the spell, restoring all the castle residents to their human forms. Initially, there were plans for a darker take on the story, something along the lines of Alice in Wonderland or Snow White and the Huntsman. But after the success of Frozen in 2013, Disney decided to return to the original film's musical format, which I think backed them into a corner. Emma Watson was Disney's choice for Belle from the very beginning, and while she isn't a terrible singer in my opinion, her voice wasn't quite at the level expected of a Disney princess. And every time she attempts one of the musical numbers, you just can't help but compare her performance to Paige O'Hara, and not once does she ever come close. I think a lot of people like to focus on Watson's casting as the film's weak link, but honestly, most of the characters feel miscast to me. Cogsworth and Lumiere feel like they were cast for recognizability rather than fit. And I just can't get over Ewan McGregor's terrible French accent. I don't really like Dan Stevens as the Beast either, but that's less to do with his performance and more to do with how weird the computer animated version of the character looks. It doesn't have the depth or emotion of his animated counterpart, and even when compared to the French film, which came out 3 years earlier, the visual effects are kinda wonky. To their credit, they did try to make the Beast a more compelling love interest. He reads, he sings, he has his own family trauma, but these additions don't really add anything to the story as a whole. Unlike Cinderella, the faithfulness to the source material just feels lazy. Beauty and the Beast is a simple enough story that there was plenty of room to do something original with it. Instead, they replicated the animated film almost beat for beat. And I distinctly remember leaving the theater when it first came out thinking, wow, that was a waste of time and money. I'm not quite as harsh on it now, mostly because Disney has dropped the bar even lower, but my main issues still stand. I will say that visually, the film isn't bad, at least the sequences that aren't mostly CGI. I even like the costumes, except for Belle's yellow ball gown, of course. Christopher Robin. Less of a direct remake and more of a continuation of the Winnie the Pooh franchise, Christopher Robin follows its titular character as an overworked adult who's left the magic of his childhood behind. One day, Pooh shows up on a park bench in London, looking for the rest of the 100-Acre Wood Gang who've gone missing, and a reluctant Christopher Robin helps him find them, rediscovering a part of himself in the process. It tackles similar themes as the Goodbye Christopher Robin biopic that came out a few years earlier, but does a much better job of it in my opinion. They establish Christopher Robin's childhood relationship with the toys, so by the time we see him as a jaded adult, you feel the weight of everything that he's lost. Even though he isn't outright likable, you empathize with him, and it's one of the few live actions that made me feel completely connected to the main character. The idea that we all get a little more cynical as we get older and slowly lose touch with what we love is something we can all relate to, and makes for a far more bittersweet story than you might expect. Pooh and the gang look like real weathered toys that a child actually played with too much, which is both charming and a little heartbreaking, especially knowing that many of the original voice actors are no longer with us. I'd describe it as Hook meets Mary Poppins meets Paddington, and Christopher Robin appeals equally to adults and children, something recent Disney doesn't often succeed at. Dumbo. I distinctly remember being in the minority as a kid for liking the 1941 version, and it always felt like such a weird choice for a live-action remake. With the original film being barely an hour long, they had to add a lot to the story to pad the runtime, to the point that the two films have barely anything in common except a flying elephant and a circus. Taking place after World War I, the circus has fallen on hard times. One day, their prized elephant gives birth to a baby with unusually large ears, and after the crowd makes fun of him, she goes on a rampage. They have no choice but to lock her away, with two circus kids and their widowed father taking baby Dumbo under their wing. They discover that he can fly, and he becomes the circus's leading act, drawing the attention of a wealthy amusement park owner. He plans to exploit Dumbo's abilities for profit, even planning to kill his mother to put an end to any distractions. But the circus comes to their aid and rescues them, releasing the pair of elephants into the wild. If the original film is on one side of the spectrum for having no plot, then the remake is on the other side for being totally convoluted. I don't mind the first half where we're meeting all of the circus performers and seeing how their mistreatment by the public is mirrored with Dumbo, but then the story takes a turn for the worse once they get to the amusement park. What should have been an emotional story about a baby elephant and a pair of kids who've been separated from their parents turns into this boring tale about adult greed. And I love Danny DeVito, I do, but I think the ringmaster needed an actor who could offer a slightly different interpretation of the character. Ava Green's character is also completely unnecessary, especially given that the strongest part about the film is the family dynamic. Adding a romantic interest just takes away from that. The biggest structural problem is that Dumbo gets demoted from the main character to the supporting cast. By moving the attention away from him, you lose the heart of the film, which is about this innocent child who's unsure about his place in the world and is desperately searching for a place to belong. You can see how weak the film's emotional core is with the way they present Baby Mine, the one Disney song that is guaranteed to make me cry every single time. This time around, the scene is split between Dumbo and his mother and the circus's human employees. We don't get to feel Dumbo's vulnerability or his mother's desperation. Now, that isn't to say that the entire movie is terrible. Burton uses enough extras that the circus feels genuinely grand in scale, and Dumbo manages to be cute more often than he is creepy. But all in all, the whole thing just feels like a Greatest Showman knockoff, and I personally think that Tim Burton would have been better suited to Pinocchio than Dumbo. Aladdin. Like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin sticks so closely to its animated counterpart that direct comparisons are impossible to avoid, and it doesn't beat its predecessor even once. The story is essentially identical, following a street thief who falls for a beautiful princess, finds a magic lamp, and with the help of a genie, disguises himself as royalty before ultimately defeating the villain. The only additions are a forced feminist subplot about Jasmine wanting to rule the kingdom by herself, and a handful of new characters who exist mainly to show how down-to-earth she is. They've updated the soundtrack, mostly by adding hip-hop elements, which I'm personally not a huge fan of. And the only song I don't think is actively worse than the original is A Whole New World. The first time around, Jasmine didn't get a solo number, and with the film attempting to give her more agency, they gave her Speechless, which is so on the nose, it's painful. They've made the Sultan less of a nincompoop, but it doesn't actually work in the context of the story, because if he's such an active ruler, how the hell did Jafar gain so much power to begin with? Speaking of Jafar, I find him to be a significant downgrade from the original. Where the animated version is genuinely scary and creepy, this one is just kind of sassy, in a way that is almost comedic, and none of his threats ever land. Even his climactic fight scene is lackluster, and before you can even register him as a legitimate threat, he's immediately defeated. There's just no sense of tension, both because of his performance and the film's overall pacing. When it comes to the genie, I think anyone who took on the role was going to have a tough time, given how beloved Robin Williams' performance is. Will Smith pulls off the showmanship well enough, but his humor and sensitivity feel forced, and the jacked blue genie look doesn't help either, making him feel less like an older mentor and more like the annoying guy at the gym who gives you unsolicited advice. I appreciate the colorful visuals, which do sell the magic of the setting, but the CGI can be a bit distracting at times, and it's hard to shake the feeling that you'd just rather be watching the original. The Lion King. The animated Lion King is practically perfect as it is, so remaking it shot for shot is one of the boldest and most baffling decisions Disney has ever made. Because they've copied the source material so closely, the bones of the remake are fine, but that's not hard to do when someone else did all the work 30 years earlier. The photorealism is the film's biggest problem. From a technical perspective, it's genuinely impressive, but it comes at the cost of what made the original great. Everything is brown and flat, the animals are impossible to tell apart, and worst of all, you can't read any of their emotions. The only visual change that I like is Scar's new design, with the mangy, battle-scarred look helping him stand out, but in a way that isn't forced. I just wish the rest of the character was as strong. The casting overall is a mixed bag. Timon and Pumbaa are one of the film's biggest disappointments, with Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen lacking the charm and camaraderie of the original. A lot of their humor falls flat, just resorting to breaking the fourth wall, and their singing is noticeably weaker than the rest of the cast. Beyoncé voicing Nala adds a lot to the musical numbers, but her voice sounds too mature for the character. And Can You Feel the Love Tonight winds up feeling less like two characters falling in love and more like a singing competition. Like most of Disney's remakes, The Lion King doesn't bring anything new to the table, and I'm genuinely shocked that it made almost $2 billion. I still haven't watched the sequel, but I'm not really inspired to do so. Lady and the Tramp. I wouldn't be surprised if you had no idea this film existed, as it was released exclusively on Disney Plus as part of the streaming service's launch, which is really all you need to know about how much confidence Disney had in it. The story follows Lady, a pampered Cocker Spaniel whose comfortable life is upended when her owners have a baby, leading her to cross paths with Tramp, a charming street dog with nowhere to call home. There were a lot of weird animal dramas around this time. A Dog's Purpose, A Dog's Way Home, A Dog's Journey. And I can't help but wonder if Disney was trying to ride that wave, because everything about this movie feels like it was made in a boardroom. The photorealistic dogs are just a little too uncanny valley, with their weird lip movements making it overwhelmingly obvious when they've swapped out the real thing for a CGI model, and like The Lion King, the realism comes at the cost of expressiveness. I think that the original Lady and the Tramp is one of Disney's prettiest films, so visually, the remake just doesn't do it for me. The voice cast doesn't help the experience either. Jacques loses his sass and overprotective energy, Lady doesn't come across as naive or pampered, and Tramp is more whiny than suave. The Siamese cats and their song have been cut, presumably due to racism, but the replacement is a total mismatch to the tone of the film. And honestly, I'm not sure this movie needed to be a musical at all. But my biggest issue is with the script. In the original, it's Aunt Sarah who hands Tramp over to the authorities. She's the villain. Here, Jim Deere does it himself, without any proof of wrongdoing, and I'm supposed to root for Tramp to join this family? Lady refusing to extend him any empathy makes her genuinely unlikable, and the whole thing just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Mulan. Mulan was actually the first Disney remake I ever reviewed on this channel, which means I've spent 6 years actively avoiding a rewatch, until this video left me no other choice. It's pretty clear they were attempting to cater to the Chinese market with the wuxia direction, but the execution is severely lacking. Wuxia lives and dies by its political intrigue, its quests for justice, and its complicated romantic plotlines, but this film feels like a weak American interpretation of all of that. It's less of a remake of the 1998 film and more of a loose adaptation of the original Chinese folktale. And honestly, if they had just marketed it as that instead of positioning it as a Mulan remake, it would have been a much easier sell. Keeping that in mind during my rewatch actually did make it more enjoyable, at least marginally. We've got a new witch character, Shan Yu has been replaced by a different bad guy, Mushu has disappeared, and Shang has been split into 2 different characters. Of these changes, the only one I find genuinely interesting is the witch, who could have served as a foil to Mulan if Disney hadn't been too chicken to make a female character a villain, but I guess that wouldn't be feminist of them. The other characters fall kind of flat, not because they didn't have potential, but because of poor writing and performances. The worst new addition is probably Mulan's sister, who not only has no personality, but whose existence lessens the pressure Mulan feels as the family's only child. The addition of Qi is another issue, as it fundamentally undermines what makes Mulan's story so compelling. Instead of watching her struggle to earn her place and be respected by all of these men, she's just jumping off of buildings at 10 years old with no help and no training. And by chalking up all of her accomplishments to magic, it makes her feel like a less independent character. Liu Yifei's performance doesn't help either. She's just angry most of the time, with none of the humor or wit that made the animated Mulan so easy to root for. The visuals are a genuine highlight though, being bright and colorful and interestingly framed. I just wish they'd had even more absurd fighting sequences. Cruella. I wasn't a huge fan of Cruella when it first came out, but after sitting with it for a few years, not to mention comparing it to Disney's other remakes, I'm able to enjoy it a lot more. An origin story for one of Disney's most iconic villains, Estella is a fashion-forward misfit who's orphaned after her mother is murdered at a party thrown by the Baroness, a powerful and ruthless fashion designer. Estella eventually lands a job working for the Baroness, unaware of her connection to her mother's death. But as she uncovers the truth, her alter ego, Cruella, begins to take over, and she sets out to destroy the woman who ruined her life. While redeeming the villain worked for me in Maleficent, I'm not sure Cruella is a character who needs that type of arc. And the origin story they've constructed for her doesn't really set up the fur-crazed individual we meet in 101 Dalmatians. But I do respect that they let the Baroness be a genuinely terrible person without softening her. And the fact that she's willing to throw her daughter off a cliff feels like a classic Disney villain moment. I think trying to include every single character from the animated movie caused a lot of problems, not only when it came to pacing, but the film's overall message. It just felt like weak writing, where instead of setting up a story where we could believably see Cruella coming into contact with Roger and Anita, they have to make them part of her story now. The film's costumes are a point of contention I know puts me in the minority, but I find them a little try-hard. There's a lack of effortless glamour compared to Glenn Close's Cruella, and the exclusion of fur does remove something essential from the character's visual identity. Ultimately, it's original enough for a live-action remake, but it doesn't resemble 101 Dalmatians in any meaningful way. Pinocchio. Directed by Robert Zemeckis and released straight to Disney+, Pinocchio follows the classic story of a wooden puppet brought to life by the Blue Fairy, who promises he can become a real boy if he proves himself brave, truthful, and unselfish. Under the guidance of his conscience, Jiminy Cricket, Pinocchio sets off into the world, getting sidetracked by a scheming fox, a puppet theater, and Pleasure Island, before eventually rescuing his father Geppetto from inside a whale. The 1940 Pinocchio has his annoying moments, but this one manages to be even more so. He's constantly yapping, while somehow having less personality than an actual block of wood. And while the original Pinocchio's flaw was naivete, this version is just stupid. He never takes responsibility for anything, with the film making every mistake someone else's fault. And as a result, his transformation into a real boy at the end feels completely unearned. It's very reflective of Disney's current storytelling approach, which seems to be that children should never be made to feel like they've done anything wrong that requires growth or accountability. Robert Zemeckis has a habit of veering into uncanny valley territory, and this is no exception. Almost every CGI character design is nightmare-inducing, and the real actors never properly interact with the animated world around them. Tom Hanks as Geppetto is a particularly sad sight, barely even trying and looking weirdly cheap, and I have to wonder what he bought with this easy paycheck. The one genuine bright spot is Cynthia Erivo as the Blue Fairy, who brings a real sweetness to the role. I just wish the film had given her more to do. Compared to Guillermo del Toro's version, or even the 1996 film with Jonathan Taylor Thomas, this feels like a clear attempt to sell merchandise rather than tell a meaningful story. Peter Pan and Wendy. The film follows Wendy Darling the night before she's sent away to boarding school, with Peter Pan whisking her and her brothers off to Neverland. There they encounter the Lost Boys, Tiger Lily, and the villainous Captain Hook, who is hell-bent on revenge against Peter for cutting off his hand and abandoning him as a friend. For a film set in a world all about the power of imagination and the magic of childhood, it somehow manages to be utterly devoid of fun, and its story is similarly uninspired, taking notes from far superior versions of Peter Pan. Ever Anderson, Mila Jovovich's daughter, was a pretty obvious case of nepotism casting, but she's actually a solid Wendy, but I don't love how the character has been written. Making the Lost Boys a mixed-gender group of orphans is a change I don't mind, but stripping away Wendy's nurturing qualities in the process misses the point entirely. Her caregiving is central to her arc, which is about accepting that she's grown up and is okay with that. You can modernize the character without taking away what makes her interesting. Peter Pan himself is for once not insufferable, but the trade-off is that he's boring. We're told a great deal about him, but we never get the sense that we actually know him. The same goes for Hook. The idea of him and Peter having a shared history is interesting, but he's never the mad, vengeful man we're led to believe, and their eventual reconciliation doesn't land as a result. Tiger Lily fares better than usual, reframed as an older sister figure rather than a Native American stereotype, and I appreciate that Wendy and Tinkerbell aren't at each other's throats the entire time. The Little Mermaid. Ariel is a curious young mermaid who dreams of the human world, much to the frustration of her overprotective father, King Triton. After saving a human prince named Eric during a shipwreck, she makes a deal with the sea witch Ursula, trading her voice for legs. The only catch? She has 3 days to make Eric fall in love with her. The one thing the film has going for it is Halle Bailey, who is genuinely adorable as Ariel and has the pipes to live up to the character. You completely buy Eric falling in love with her so quickly, and she carries a lot of the film's emotional weight on her back, with the reprise of Part of Your World being genuinely devastating. The rest of the film is a mixed bag at best. Javier Bardem is a wonderful actor, but he plays Triton as perpetually furious, with none of the humor or softness that makes his eventual sacrifice hit so hard in the original. This time around, you completely understand why Ariel wants to leave, because every single person in her life is just constantly ignoring or yelling at her. Making Ursula Ariel's aunt is an interesting choice, but I wasn't sold on Melissa McCarthy's performance, especially when Queen Latifah has already given us the definitive live-action Ursula. They've expanded Eric's character by making him adopted and giving him a new song, but they've also made him considerably less heroic in order to give Ariel more agency. The actors do have great chemistry though, and I respect that they made him more apologetic for his betrayal of Ariel. The decision to prioritize realism for the underwater world backfires horribly. Flounder and Sebastian lose the charm and expressiveness of their animated counterparts. All of the mermaids look strange, with their torsos moving independently from their tails, and Atlantica, the magical mermaid world, is just a pile of brown, lifeless coral. All of the new songs are a real disappointment, with Scuttlebutt being one of the worst things I've ever heard in a Disney film. And I don't know why the company insists on working with Lin-Manuel Miranda over and over again when everything he delivers is mediocre at best. My favorite sequence in the entire film is probably Ariel and Eric's date, mostly because it's the stretch with the least CGI and actually feels like a real lived-in world, and I wish the whole film had felt more like that. Snow White. Snow White is a kind-hearted young princess whose beauty draws the murderous envy of her vain stepmother, the evil queen. Forced to flee the castle, she takes refuge in a cottage belonging to 7 dwarves, but the queen tracks her down, disguising herself as an old woman, to offer Snow White a poisoned apple. After falling into an enchanted sleep, Snow White is eventually awakened by a kiss. Together with her new friends, she challenges the queen, who is destroyed by her own dark magic. Snow White feels like it was inspired less by its 1937 counterpart, and instead Disney's other live actions, specifically Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, which is a crazy choice to me since neither of those films were good enough to warrant copying to begin with. Like so many entries on this list, it's a film that keeps the most recognizable elements of the original movie: the dress, the dwarves, the poisoned apple, because those are the things that sell merchandise, while completely losing the heart of the story in the process. Gal Gadot as the evil queen is perhaps the worst live-action Disney casting yet. She can't act, she can't sing, she can't do anything. Compared to the Academy Award winners Disney has previously cast in their villain roles, it's a genuinely baffling choice. And because she's so lackluster, the tension in the film just doesn't work, because you're spending the entire time trying not to laugh at her. Snow White herself is similarly muddled. She's been updated to be more vocal and active, which I don't inherently hate, but the film can't decide what it actually wants her personality to be. She's outspoken only when the plot demands it, otherwise reverting to mousy and passive. And her romance with Jonathan, the prince reimagined as a poor rebel, is terribly flat, with the two actors having no chemistry. The dwarves' designs are genuinely terrifying, and having Dopey talk is a huge mistake. I do think that the whistle while you work sequence is fun, but in general, the new songs are completely underwhelming, being a cheap imitation of the grand Broadway musicals that inspired some of Disney's greatest hits. While they at least had some fun with color, there's a gray sheen over the whole film that stops it from ever feeling truly magical. Lilo and Stitch. Lilo is a lonely, eccentric young girl living in Hawaii with her older sister Nani, who is fighting to keep custody of her after the death of their parents. When Lilo adopts what she thinks is a dog from the shelter, but is actually a genetically engineered alien experiment named Stitch, the two misfits form an unlikely bond, teaching each other the meaning of ohana. Family means nobody gets left behind. Except apparently in this version, they do. The film's most baffling change is having Nani willingly give Lilo up so she can leave for college, which is so fundamentally at odds with everything her character stands for that it's a slap in the face to the original. Maya Kealoha does a good job as Lilo, being just as adorable as the original, which is pretty important since she's the central character. The other humans in comparison are totally flat, feeling like generic tropes instead of real people. Stitch is Stitch. Basically nothing about him has changed in 20 years, which isn't a bad thing, I suppose, but does really make you question why this film had to exist in the first place. Jumba has been reframed as more of an outright villain following the removal of Captain Gontu, so we miss out on the evolution of Jumba's friendship with Pleakley and the Pelicais, which is one of the highlights of the original franchise. And I question what this choice will mean for the sequel that Disney is currently planning. I don't have high expectations when it comes to the look of the live-action remakes, but even I can't believe how they managed to make Hawaii, one of the most visually stunning places on Earth, look dull and lifeless. Now that we've gone through all 18 Disney live-action remakes, let's get to the rankings, starting from the worst and ending with the best. Now this is going to be heavily biased, so don't take it too seriously if your favorite isn't mine. Pinocchio. An actual disgrace to Walt Disney's legacy, and everyone involved should honestly be ashamed of themselves. It's a steaming pile of shit. Lilo and Stitch. They completely forgot about the meaning of Ohana, and to this day, I have no idea how such a lackluster cash grab made over $1 billion. Lady and the Tramp. I'm not surprised that this went straight to Disney Plus, because there's absolutely no reason that this movie should exist. Peter Pan and Wendy. The first Peter Pan movie that hasn't made me want to take a trip to Neverland. Jude Law should sue whoever gave him that terrible wig. Snow White. Don't let the internet trick you into thinking Rachel Zegler is the worst part of this movie, because she's the only thing that makes it watchable. Why are people still hiring Gal Gadot? She can't act. The Lion King. A nature documentary featuring Beyoncé. I don't know how they managed to make Hakuna Matata feel joyless. The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Painfully generic with a cast that is honestly exhausting, which is a pity since the premise actually had some potential. Dumbo. They made Dumbo a supporting character in his own movie, which switches from a heartfelt story about family and acceptance to one where adults just argue about money. The Little Mermaid. Terrible songs, terrible CGI, terrible villains. Halle Bailey is the only thing that saves this from being complete trash. Mulan. This is a completely new film masquerading as a remake, which would have been fine if Disney had said that from the get-go. They have a fundamental misunderstanding of what made Mulan so beloved, but at least they get some points for originality. Aladdin. Will Smith gives it his best shot, but he's fighting a losing battle. The only reason this isn't lower is because I actually like how it looks. The Jungle Book. Shere Khan is terrifying and Christopher Walken absolutely kills it, but the photorealistic animals can't carry the emotional weight the story needs. Beauty and the Beast. It has its ups and downs, with most of the changes doing very little to enhance the story, but at least there aren't a lot of them, so I'm not actively distracted. I honestly think if they'd gotten rid of the musical aspect, it actually could have been good. Cruella. A fun romp, even if it has little in common with the source material. Both Emmas fully commit to their roles, and I enjoy seeing true wickedness in a Disney film. I have no idea how they're going to do a sequel though. Alice in Wonderland. It isn't perfect, but I respect how they played around with the source material, continuing Alice's story without erasing the original film. Christopher Robin. Unexpectedly moving, proving that Disney works best when they're telling human stories with heart. Maleficent. A bold reimagining that brings something new to the Sleeping Beauty story without stomping all over it. Angelina Jolie was born to play Maleficent, and I think Elle Fanning is a perfect Aurora. I just wish the sequel wasn't so terrible, because the fairy designs deserved more than that. Cinderella. It's faithful to the source material while still bringing something new to the table. Great performances, great visuals, great costumes. It's actual movie magic and has become one of my favorite Cinderella adaptations in general. If more of the live actions had been like this, I don't think I would have had as much issue with them. Which Disney live action remake do you think is the worst? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!